World War I is often overshadowed by the cataclysmic events of World War II. Yet, this conflict, known as the Great War, was a pivotal moment in history. It reshaped the world in ways that still resonate today. While the trenches of the Western Front are the most iconic image of this war, there were many other fronts, many other stories that played crucial roles in shaping the course of the conflict and the world that followed. Join us as we journey beyond the trenches to uncover the hidden dimensions of World War I. World War I is often seen through a Eurocentric lens, focusing on the brutal stalemates of the Western Front in France and Belgium. But this was no mere European war. It was a truly global conflict, dragging countries from every corner of the globe into its bloody maw. Let's begin with the involvement of non-European nations. The British and French empires, which spanned continents, brought soldiers from their colonies to fight in Europe and beyond. Over 1 million Indian soldiers served in the British Army, fighting in places as diverse as the Western Front, Mesopotamia, and East Africa. From French West Africa, soldiers were recruited to fight in Europe, a situation that would later lead to significant social and political changes in these colonies. The war also saw significant campaigns in Africa and the Middle East. In Africa, battles raged as German and Allied forces fought for control over colonies. The East African campaign in particular became a prolonged and bitter struggle, with troops battling not only each other, but also the harsh environment and diseases like malaria. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, the war sparked the Arab Revolt, a critical moment in the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Figures like T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, became iconic in the Western imagination, but the true story involved a complex web of alliances and betrayals that would shape the modern Middle East. Far from the trenches of Europe, Japan, aligned with the Allies, seized German territories in the Pacific. This was not merely opportunism, it was part of a broader strategy to expand Japanese influence in the region. These actions would have far-reaching consequences, setting the stage for future conflicts in the Pacific during World War II. World War I was a crucible of technological and tactical innovation. It was the first large-scale conflict of the industrial age, and it introduced weapons and methods of warfare that would define the 20th century. The birth of modern warfare can be traced directly to this conflict. Tanks, a new invention at the time, were first used in battle by the British in 1916. These behemoths were intended to break the deadlock of trench warfare, though their early use was hampered by mechanical failures and difficult terrain. Chemical weapons such as chlorine and mustard gas brought a new level of horror to the battlefield. These weapons, designed to incapacitate and demoralize the enemy, caused suffering on a scale previously unimaginable. The widespread use of gas masks became a grim necessity for soldiers on all fronts. The skies over Europe also saw a new kind of combat. Aerial warfare, still in its infancy, rapidly evolved during World War I. The warplanes of 1914 were little more than reconnaissance tools, but by 1918 they had become formidable weapons, capable of bombing, strafing, and engaging in dogfights. Pilots like the Red Baron Manfred von Richthofen became legends, and the era of air superiority began. Trench warfare, synonymous with World War I, forced military strategists to rethink traditional battle tactics. The static nature of the trenches led to the development of creeping barrages, artillery fire that moved forward in stages, protecting advancing infantry. Meanwhile, Germany's stormtrooper tactics, which involved small, fast-moving units penetrating enemy lines, foreshadowed the tactics that would dominate World War II. The war also revolutionized communications. Wireless radio, still a relatively new technology, became essential for coordinating large-scale operations. And in the artillery duels that define much of the Western Front, sound ranging, using microphones to detect enemy guns, became a vital tool for counter-battery fire. The impact of World War I extended far beyond the battlefield. The war brought about significant social changes, many of which would shape the 20th century. With millions of men fighting at the front, women stepped into roles that had been traditionally closed to them. In Britain, the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps was established, allowing women to serve in non-combat roles, such as clerks and telephone operators. In Russia, the Women's Battalion of Death was formed, a striking symbol of women's direct involvement in the war effort. The war also had a profound effect on art, literature, and philosophy. The sheer scale of the conflict and the suffering it caused led to widespread disillusionment. This disillusionment found expression in the modernist movements that emerged in the post-war years. Works like Erich Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front captured the grim realities of trench warfare, while artists like Otto Dix depicted the war's horrors in stark, unflinching detail. The war also accelerated social changes. In many countries, women gained the right to vote in the years following the war, a recognition of their contributions to the war effort. The war also laid the groundwork for the civil rights movements that would emerge in the decades to come, as returning soldiers, particularly those from colonies, began to demand greater recognition and rights. While technological innovations defined much of the war, the brutal reality of trench warfare is what most soldiers experienced. The trenches, stretching for hundreds of miles across Europe, became the final resting place for millions. Life in the trenches was hellish. Soldiers lived in constant fear of artillery bombardments, snipers, and gas attacks. The trenches themselves were often filled with mud, water, and the stench of death. Rats and lice were constant companions, spreading disease and adding to the misery. The conditions in the trenches also led to medical horrors like trench foot, a painful condition caused by prolonged exposure to damp and unsanitary conditions. But perhaps the most insidious effect of trench warfare was the psychological toll it took on soldiers. The constant stress and trauma led to what was then called shell shock, a condition we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. By 1917, the strain of trench warfare had reached a breaking point. In the French army, widespread mutinies broke out as soldiers refused to participate in what they saw as suicidal assaults. These mutinies were brutally suppressed, but they highlighted the deep discontent among the troops and the immense pressures they were under. World War I was also a war of words and images. Both sides used propaganda extensively to maintain morale at home and to demonize the enemy. Propaganda took many forms. Posters, films, and controlled media were all used to shape public opinion. In Britain, the government's propaganda machine churned out images of brave soldiers and monstrous enemies designed to keep the public supportive of the war effort. The famous image of Lord Kitchener pointing directly at the viewer with the words, "Your country needs you," became an iconic call to arms. But propaganda was not just about boosting morale. It was also about psychological warfare, undermining the enemy's will to fight. Espionage played a significant role in this aspect of the war. One of the most famous spies of the time was Mata Hari, an exotic dancer who was executed by the French for allegedly spying for Germany. Her story, whether true or embellished, became a symbol of the murky world of wartime espionage. Code breaking was another crucial aspect of the war. The interception and decryption of the Zimmermann telegram in 1917 was a pivotal moment. This secret communication from Germany to Mexico proposed a military alliance against the United States, and its revelation helped to bring America into the war, a turning point that would eventually tip the balance in favor of the Allies. The environmental impact of World War I was unprecedented. The battlefields, especially on the Western Front, became wastelands, scarred by years of relentless fighting. Vast areas of land, once fertile farmland or dense forests, were transformed into barren, cratered wastelands. The heavy artillery barrages that defined the war left the landscape pockmarked with shell holes, while forests were reduced to splintered, lifeless stumps. The use of chemical weapons also left a lasting impact on the environment. Mustard gas and other toxic substances seeped into the soil and water, contaminating them for years to come. In some areas, the effects of these chemicals are still felt today, with unexploded ordnance and poisoned land remaining dangerous legacies of the war. The end of World War I marked the beginning of a new era in world history. The war had shattered the old world order, leading to the collapse of empires and the redrawing of borders. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the German Empire. The Russian Empire all fell in the wake of the war. New nations were born from their ruins, particularly in Europe and the Middle East. But these new borders were often drawn with little regard for the ethnic and religious complexities of the regions, sowing the seeds for future conflicts. The economic consequences of the war were also severe. The war had drained the resources of the belligerent nations, leading to economic instability across Europe. In Germany, the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, coupled with the war's economic toll, led to hyperinflation and political instability. These conditions set the stage for the rise of extremism and the eventual outbreak of World War II. The global economic turmoil that followed the war was compounded by the Great Depression of the 1930s. The economic strain of World War I had weakened the global economy, and the crash of 1929 plunged the world into a decade of hardship. The social and political upheavals of this period can be traced back in part to the lasting impacts of the Great War. While the Western Front often dominates the narrative of World War I, the Eastern Front was equally, if not more, significant in terms of scale and impact. The Eastern Front stretched from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, a vast and fluid battlefield where the traditional rules of warfare often did not apply. The battles here were massive, with millions of soldiers engaged in brutal combat. The scale of the fighting, combined with the harsh conditions, resulted in immense suffering for both soldiers and civilians. The strain of war on the Eastern Front contributed directly to the Russian Revolution of 1917. The collapse of the Tsarist regime and the subsequent rise of the Bolsheviks led to Russia's withdrawal from the war. This had a profound impact on the course of the conflict, allowing Germany to shift its focus to the Western Front in 1918. The revolution also marked the beginning of a new era in Russian history, leading to the creation of the Soviet Union and the spread of communism, a development that would define much of the 20th century. Amidst the human suffering of World War I, the role of animals in the conflict is often overlooked. Yet animals played crucial roles in the war effort, serving alongside soldiers on the front lines. Horses were the backbone of transportation during the war, pulling artillery and supply wagons across the difficult terrain of the front lines. They were indispensable in an era when motor vehicles were still in their infancy. Dogs, too, served valiantly, acting as messengers, medical aids, and even as mascots for the troops. Their keen senses made them invaluable in the trenches, where they could detect gas attacks and find wounded soldiers. Pigeons, with their homing instincts, were used extensively for communication, particularly when radio technology was unavailable or unreliable. These birds carried critical messages across battlefields, often saving lives by ensuring that orders and information reached their destinations. In more exotic theaters of the war, such as the Middle East and Africa, camels, mules, and even elephants were employed to navigate the harsh landscapes, showcasing the diverse challenges faced in different regions. As World War I drew to a close, another deadly adversary emerged, the Spanish flu. This pandemic, which swept across the globe in 1918 and 1919, claimed more lives than the war itself, adding another layer of tragedy to an already devastated world. The Spanish flu spread rapidly, infecting an estimated 1/3 of the global population. The movement of troops and the poor conditions in the trenches contributed to the virus's swift spread. Overcrowded military camps and hospitals became breeding grounds for the disease, which did not discriminate between soldier and civilian. The impact of the Spanish flu was truly global. In India, millions perished as the virus swept through densely populated areas. In Europe and North America, communities already weakened by the war were hit hard, with entire towns and cities brought to a standstill. The flu pandemic of 1918 remains one of the deadliest in human history, a grim reminder of the interconnectedness of our world. World War I was a conflict of immense complexity and far-reaching consequences. From the global scale of its battles to the profound social, cultural, and environmental impacts, the war left a legacy that continues to shape our world today. As we reflect on these often overlooked aspects, we gain a deeper understanding of a war that changed everything. The landscapes, the borders, the societies, all were irrevocably altered by the conflict. The lessons of World War I of sacrifice and the cost of human conflict continue to echo through the generations, reminding us of the fragile peace we must strive to maintain. Thank you for watching our in-depth exploration of World War I. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more insightful content on historical events and beyond, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.